There were those who regarded Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones's change of career from potentially eminent London physician to humble pastor of a Calvinistic mission as romantic, others as foolish. The one thing of which Martyn Lloyd-Jones was certain was that his settlement in 1927, amidst the industrial depression of South Wales, was no sacrifice. As he himself said, "I gave up nothing. I received everything. I counted the highest honor God can confer on any man to be a herald of the gospel." On the verge of World War II, the doctor received a call to return to London and became minister of Westminster Chapel. It was during the Westminster years that Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones preached all his famous sermon series, which were originally recorded on reel-to-reel tape. These original sermons have been digitally restored and are now available in MP3 format as the Legacy Collection. In the following rare television interview, Dr. Lloyd-Jones talks about aspects of his life and ministry, particularly the call to preach, and what should characterize the preaching of any man who is truly called and anointed of God to this sacred office.
A man who has preached, and since his recent retirement from the care of his church, still preaches all over the world with burning sincerity and conviction, and he is Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones. Now, Dr. Martyn Lloyd-Jones, you've been about 40 years in the ministry, and before that you were a physician on the threshold of a very successful career. Now, what made you change course?
Well, of course, that's a question one can't answer in a few words. It was nothing sudden or dramatic. It was a process which went on really for several years, but particularly for the last 18 months before I left medicine and became a minister of the gospel.
What do you believe would make a successful preacher? Had you those qualities? Did you feel in yourself that you had the qualities that would make a successful preacher?
I really was never concerned about that. My concern was with what needed to be preached. And it was this burning conviction as to the message needed that drove me on. I've sometimes told people of a story which will help to answer your question, how, having taken my decision to go into the church and to preach, someone very near to me was walking with me one night and asked me the question, how do you know that you'll be able to preach? You know what you can do as a doctor, why not go on with that and exercise Christian influence? What if you find suddenly that you can't preach? Well, I'd only tried preaching about 3 times in very small places, and the only answer I could give was this: I know what I want to preach and what I think must be preached, and I have a feeling somehow that I'll be able to say it.
Did anything happen during your childhood days which predisposed you towards a career in the ministry?
Well, the one big thing, of course, was that I very nearly lost my life at the age of 10. Our home, somehow or other, went on fire, and my brother and myself and my father, my mother was away from home, we very nearly lost our lives in the fire. We just escaped. And I, ever since then, had some peculiar feeling and sensation that I was called to do something in this world with respect to mankind. I'll put it as generally as that. It first came to me in the form of medicine, and then, as I said, it turned to the hour.
Now, your father, I understand, was a radical. He was a follower of R.J. Campbell and a politician. Now, it seems to me that there's been a reaction against this in your life. He was against the piety of Methodism, for instance. Now, would you say that you've reacted violently against your father's views?
No, far from it. My father's influence on me was one of the greatest of all, because of his sincerity and his honesty. Now, what he reacted against, I've always reacted against, was the degeneration of true Methodism. By our time, the fire had gone, and it was. It wasn't a true Puritanism, it was a false Puritanism. It was a preaching of morality without any gospel. And of course he reacted also against the popular preaching, and I've always reacted against it, the mechanical popular preaching, what was the old Welsh hwyl, which I think was put on generally. Now, he reacted against that, so did I, but we reacted in different ways only in this sense, that he turned to people like R.J. Campbell in the then New Theology, and I turned back to the message that was preached by the Methodist fathers, and which I maintain is the message of the church throughout the centuries.
It's a coincidence, perhaps, but when the booklet on called The Fundamentals, I think, which gave the name fundamentalist to that group who believe in that way, there's a coincidence that among them there were, in the first booklet published, Dr. Campbell Morgan, and also a man described as an eminent physician. Now, are you a fundamentalist?
Well, I, like many others, I don't like the term. I prefer to call myself a conservative evangelical. That is very largely because of the abuse of the term, I think, in the United States. But I am a conservative evangelical, as Dr. Campbell Morgan himself was, and as most of those men who wrote the contributions to that symposium you're talking about were.
What would you say the difference between yourself and the people who call themselves fundamentalists is?
Well, one doesn't want to be offensive, but I think our attitude is a little more intelligent. I mean, I have very little sympathy with the man who just holds up a Bible and says, I believe this from cover to cover, every comma and full stop, and all the rest of it. There's been a little bit too much of that, and a refusal to use one's mind and to recognize figures of speech and so on. I think their danger has been to be literalistic in a wrong sense. That would be the main difference, I think, between us.
One thing that's impressed me about Westminster Chapel, the services there when I've attended, is first of all, the amazing number of young people you have, and that they're also there with their Bibles in their hands. And as you preach, so they turn the leaves of the Bible and follow you. And it seems that your style is different in many ways from the style of the preachers we heard in Wales at the beginning of this century. Now, what do you think is the attraction for these young people in your preaching?
Well, I would say that what appeals to them is the note of authority, and that isn't anything in me. It's that I am an expositor of the Scriptures. I don't believe it's the preacher's function to stand up and voice his own opinions and theories and ideas, but to expound and to bring out the message of the Bible. And I think it's this, and one does this in as reasoning and as logical a manner as one can, to show the inevitability of the conclusion. And I think that young people today are looking for authority. They're bewildered and they're confused, and they want something certain.